I think it's really hard to take responsibility or to grow from something if you're not ready to take responsibility for it yet, right?
Right.
I mean, if you're not willing to kind of take that inventory of yourself and really dive into what are the things that I may be contributing to in this dynamic here,
Right.
then how are we supposed to grow? How are you supposed to realize that, or how are you supposed to compromise? And I'm curious because you talked about some addiction and behavioral stuff there, and where my mind is going to is part of the 12-step program of kind of creating that fearless and moral inventory of yourself
Yeah.
and all the things that you've done wrong, and sharing that with somebody else. And I'm going on 6 years sober here in my life. So
Yeah.
I've gone through that
Congratulations.
process. Thank you. And going through that process, I feel was a very important change in my life to really go into that. I don't think that I ever did that before I went through that step in the 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
And, if for anyone out there, I'm going to plug this book because I love plugging this book. One day we're going to get Russell Brand on this show, JJ. Russell Brand does a book. It's called Recovery, and it talks about, addiction and we're all addicted to something. We're all addicts.
Right,
some of us, it may be something more apparent like sex or drugs or alcohol but some of it is a little bit less apparent like your phone or work or, bad behaviors.
Sure.
And this book is, talking about using the 12-step program to kind of call attention to your addictions and how to kind of work through it. And I think that this is really relevant to what we're talking to here, because I think that behavior is also an addiction, right? And sometimes we're not even aware of these behaviors. We've grown up and been programmed in the subconscious way by our parents, or, we're not ready to look at those behaviors. So I think doing this 12-step work and the step that we're talking about and that inventory of oneself just is so vital into understanding oneself and the addiction to that behavior and how to grow from that behavior.
Yeah, that's really good. In all the years that I worked in addictions field, what I was aware of is if one or another party was active in an addiction, then their maturity level stopped when they started their addiction. They may have gotten smarter and wiser, but in terms of dealing with inner emotions, thinking of it this way is that addiction is a survival mechanism. See, the goal when we want to create love or intimacy is we want to mature and thrive. Well, thriving is a completely different set of skills than surviving. And addiction is all about surviving. So I would always say to couples if they come in and one was in an active addiction, I say to the addicted person, are you willing to do some form of recovery, whether it's 12 steps, treatment, or find a way to address your addiction? And I would often refer the other person to codependency treatment. So some form of Al-Anon or Nar-Anon or Codependence Anonymous, because they needed to understand that what we called in our video the hostile dependent part of a relationship, many couples get stuck there because they have unconscious habitual survival patterns that keep them recycling the same trauma. The situation changes, but the trauma and the way to deal with the trauma recycles over and over again. So we try to interrupt that piece. And we'll say to people before we bring them into group, you have to have a solid sobriety before we open deep emotional issues. Because if you don't have sobriety, you're just going to re-traumatize yourself.